What will be the new normal? That is the question and topic of our next speaker. Let me present to you Gavin Gallagher.
Hi guys, great to be here, and I'm just going to share my slides. I want to thank everyone, and I was thrilled to be invited to RecoTech, and I really look forward to seeing Helsinki in its beauty. And then of course COVID came along, and we're now all in a situation where we're virtual. So I hope you'll have me back someday, and I'll be able to see Helsinki. I was kind of looking forward to that. So my talk today, as has been discussed, the new normal, office or no office. And I think there's a lot of different things going on, a lot of people in reaction mode. And so today my conversation or my talk is going to center on future of work, what it was like, what the future was going to be pre-COVID and what it's like now post-COVID, the impact on corporate real estate, how the sector should respond, and my predictions and trends, stuff that I'm seeing at the moment. So first of all, who is this guy? Why are you listening to an Irish guy up there in Finland? Brief story. I've been in the real estate investment and development business for over 20 years. I'm involved in a family business that has a commercial arm and a residential arm, and I look after the commercial. We are probably best known for this business park that we developed. It's got about 9,000 sort of people on a normal day-to-day basis, but that was pre-COVID. And it's a 40-acre estate with 38 buildings occupying, about 50 different occupiers. And we have a whole system that we run in order to kind of make the place run smoothly. We have our own bus service. We bring people to local transport hubs. We do about 3,500 people a day, 2,500 car spaces. So it's a big logistical operation, and it keeps us very active. But through the insights of working with 50 different occupiers, it's pretty useful for actually getting an insight into how everyone is responding. Just a little bit of history. This is an old aerial photograph from the 1990s. We started building East Point actually on a landfill site. And so it was reclaimed land from this estuary that you see. There's a river there. And we had to remediate the land. We had to go and remove all the methane and the harmful gases. And it took over 10 years to develop the project. And then once we got it up and running, we started running it as a business park, mostly aimed at US technology companies. A lot of foreign direct investment came into Ireland on that basis. So during the financial crisis, the park took a big beating. And so I decided to move abroad, and I spent about 6-7 years in different places. I was in the Middle East for a little bit of time. And during that time, I was involved in a project where we built Standard Chartered Bank's headquarter building for the Middle East and Africa. We also built the African one. These are the two buildings there in their finished state. Large buildings over 200,000 square feet or 20,000 square meters. And these projects, they were so impressed with these projects, so satisfied, that they asked us to do similar projects in Asia and all sorts of places around the world. So we got very occupied, very familiar with corporate real estate and all of that stuff. I came back to Ireland full of information on how the commercial real estate industry works. I identified 4 main trends that were driving the industry. I put together a thing that I call the Aspire method, and it was basically a way to create a winning workplace. And I wrote a book, and the book was planned that it was going to be my masterpiece for this whole sector. And what happened? Coronavirus happened. And so it has been a bit of a disaster for the book anyway, and also for the industry, obviously. And overnight my book became kind of irrelevant, and so I've decided to shelve that until things return. The market also took a pretty heavy hit. Obviously, retail has been tremendously damaged. It was already on its last knees with the virtual world coming along, online shopping. Amazon in particular had done a lot of damage to bricks and mortar stores. And in this last year, I think a huge number of them are not going to survive. On the opposite side of the scale, warehousing is doing tremendously well. In the Irish market, the warehousing has dropped, vacancy rate has dropped from 4% down to 1%. And most deals are done before the building is even completed. They're actually pre-let or pre-sold. So looking into the future of work, I decided to split this into two different categories. You've got before COVID and after COVID. And the reason is because pre-COVID, that we were on a clear track to the future. There was a number of principal drivers pushing us. What's the first thing to remember is organizations don't want an office. They want a productive workforce. So if you can give them that without the office, they'll take that. The question is, can you give them a productive workforce without the office? Now, the biggest driver that I saw, my insight based here, talking to my occupiers and the 9,000 staff that they employ, the biggest driver I witnessed was recruitment and retention. It was called the war on talent. And these guys were in a huge battle to try to recruit the best talent. And once they had recruited them, to retain them for as long as possible. Now, other drivers were there in the background, but that seemed to be the biggest one. CSR, corporate social responsibility, huge amount of influence creeping in around environmental sustainability. And I see nowadays ESG policy is becoming a big issue. And ESG is obviously environmental, social, and governance. So green has a big part to play in this whole thing. Wellness has also crept in, and I've started to see a number of the buildings having wellness certificates, or well certs as they're called. And it's all about, at the end of the day, it's all about creating corporate culture, the best corporate culture, stuff that, creates a bond with your staff, creates social interaction, that people feel a loyalty and they don't want to leave the business. So what has COVID brought us? Well, COVID certainly has. What is the benefits of COVID? Well, the benefits are nobody has to face this kind of commute in the morning. And obviously, that being the case, there is enormous efficiencies in being able to work from home. This was a typical morning commute for most people pre-pandemic. And it was hours and hours a day. Over a week, people were spending a huge amount of time stuck in their car or on public transport back and forth. And obviously, when you remove the need for that and everyone has to stay home, suddenly you notice this. And it has become very clear to the vast majority of people who have been doing this kind of commute just how inefficient it was and how much time was being spent in the car and how much more productive they are. They've got additional hours to work on projects. They also have additional time to spend with family. The knock-on effect of that has been the residential sector has actually seen an uptick. We have seen in this country, we've seen a number of people buying houses in rural parts of the country where it's very, very beautiful, very inexpensive, and they can have the best of both worlds. You can actually commute when you need to commute, but the rest of the time you live in this kind of beautiful area, your costs are much lower and you have that added productivity. So I don't think very many of us want to go back to this kind of thing. The next thing is work from home. Now, in theory, work from home is fantastic. You can see here how lovely her kitchen is. There's no mess. There's no distractions. There's no kids running around distracting her. Everything is perfect. And in theory, work from home is a dream solution. The reality is something a little bit different. It's not quite living up to the dream. It's not quite living up to the theory. And a lot of people who have small homes will appreciate this. You working in your kitchen when the family wants to eat, huge distraction. Anyone with small kids, I have small kids, and as soon as they get home from school, huge distraction. It was even worse, obviously, during the lockdown when the schools were closed and the kids were actually in the house with you. Anyone who has a partner who works as well is going to have a challenging time trying to figure out who has the quiet area, who's looking after the kids. It has been a challenge. So why do we need an office? And this, by the way, is the Bloomberg office in London, and I went to visit it last year, is the greenest building on the planet, according to the billing. And it's obviously when you have a billionaire founder who can afford to spend 1 billion building an office, it helps. But this is a great example of how it can be done. It has a BREEAM rating of 98.6, which is the highest I think ever recorded. But let's get into the details, why you actually need an office. I call them the 4 C's, and the 4 C's are concentration, communication, collaboration, and community. And by concentration, I mean quiet time to work on your tasks, on your projects, things that you need to concentrate on. By communication, obviously, this is the communication. We now have email, we have virtual meetings. We have, before that, you could have meetings in your office. You could communicate directly with your staff face to face. That's not necessary any longer. Collaboration can also be done virtually, but doesn't seem to be working. And then community is most definitely not working from home. And so what we have is a bifurcation of these 4 C's. And what I have found is that communication and concentration, this can work from home, and this was the immediate benefit that people saw when COVID struck. You found that communication hasn't suffered and concentration hasn't suffered, and therefore it's fine. This can work. However, now that we're slightly further into COVID, we're starting to realize that collaboration and community are the areas that are suffering. Turns out that collaboration over a virtual meeting solution like Zoom or whatever isn't that good. And you need the energy and the kind of feedback that you get in a live situation for good collaboration meetings. That is certainly the view that I felt. Also, education. I've been canvassing a lot of our tenants, and we found that things like mentoring younger staff, things of that nature, are very difficult to do in a virtual environment. And lastly, community. Everybody that I've spoken to wants to get back to the office now because they miss the social reaction, they miss their friends, they miss just the kind of the normal sense that you get from working together. So what are we looking at post-COVID? I think the workplace is here to stay, but I do think I think work from home is here to stay. But what I do believe is that it is going to start to be a combination or a hybrid where people will work at home for a couple of days a week if they choose. And it might suit people who live further out, but it doesn't suit everybody. People with young children and things like that will understand this. I think there's going to be a reconfiguration of the office. I think we're going to start to see a little bit more change. I think we're going to see additional hot desking and an increase in the number of social areas and collaboration and meeting spaces. I think regional flex office options are going to start to become a thing. But ultimately, we have to go back to the principal drivers that I spoke about at the beginning, and that is recruitment and retention is number one, and then the corporate social responsibility, the ESG, the green, and then the corporate culture. So getting into the impact that it has had on corporate real estate in the last couple of months, and it wasn't long before you started to see headlines popping up, and this one I saw in August there, the office as you know it is dead. And it wasn't long before a lot of headlines came up. And you might notice that the word dead is in every single one of them. And this is concerning for somebody like me who manages a large office portfolio. And so we've also seen share prices of REITs fall. We've seen the property market fall. We've also seen KPMG's findings that recently released saying that 72% of CEOs believe that work from home has widened their talent pool. Now, those are CEOs in large companies. 68% of them are saying that they are now planning to reduce their footprint, their office footprint. Another concerning thing. So I decided to think, what is my direct insight that I'm seeing based in East Point and what we're seeing on the ground? And here's an aerial photo I took with my drone during the during the lockdown. And you can see almost empty of cars, one or two people, critical infrastructure staff were in, and some contractors were doing some work. And this has been the case that we've seen. It's mostly been empty since March, and it's not good for us as a commercial real estate portfolio manager, owner, investor to see this kind of thing. We have seen a big drive to lower the costs. Our estate management costs are under pressure. We're being asked to bring those down. But what I am seeing is that this is a very, very sector dependent issue. And we have got a situation where people that are serving the hospitality sector or people who are serving the travel sector, and those guys are really struggling. A lot of them are under pricing pressure. Their share price is under pressure. They're having to make huge cuts. On the other side of the scale, people that have got virtual offerings, people who are serving, for example, the gaming market, we have seen those occupiers that serve those markets doing extraordinarily well. We've seen their share prices are going through the roof, and we're seeing that they're actually taking additional space and hiring more staff. Having said that, we do anticipate to see an increase in our vacancy rate and tenants exercising breaks. And we've already seen evidence of price chipping, with prices of buildings that were previously for sale dropping somewhat. What I would remind you all, though, is do not forget September 11th, 2001, I was in the US when this happened, and it was quite a remarkable thing. It was at that moment when the airline industry was at its all-time high, the highest number of passengers it had ever transported. 9/11 took place, the Twin Towers came down, and overnight the market collapsed, and it took 3 years for the market to recover. However, when it did recover, it actually continued to go on to double and treble the amount of the previous high. So the market does forget, and you do start to see normality return. And that is something that I think we also saw it in 2008, 2009 after the global financial collapse. And I think it's going to happen again in this case. I think a certain amount of reality will creep back in. And so how should the sector respond? Well, how it is currently responding resembles this. And it is a situation where people are trying to put out fires. You've got governments trying to raise money to fund all of this. You've got companies furloughing staff. It's a disaster at the moment, in the same way 9/11 was a disaster at that moment. But when things recover and things stabilize, I think it'll become to a slightly more normal. And I think then an opportunity or a threat will be something that people start to evaluate. At the moment, the market is a threat, but it's also an opportunity. I think what you've got to remember is every single transaction has got two parties. You've got the buyer and then you've got the seller. And so it's an opportunity for one and a threat for the other. And time only tells whether you're the winner or the loser. Usually somebody does regret their transaction, and usually somebody is delighted that they made the transaction. Looking into the future, I do think collaboration and community, I think the big opportunities are those two. That's going to be an area where if you can enhance that in some way, you're going to grab the attention of any kind of the large occupiers. I think there's going to be a big shift to agile workplace and the activity-based workplace. There's going to be a greater emphasis on social interaction and collaboration and all that, but the social side of it, to sort of the importance of corporate culture is there, because I think you're going to start to see that retention of staffing become an issue if the corporate culture starts to slip. Opportunities for tech solutions, obviously huge. I think everyone now realizes that the companies that had tech solutions available to them, they're the ones that have thrived. Other people have fallen off and have suffered very badly. And also then there is this fear of uncertainty. So I think flexible office solutions will present a big opportunity for people. The predictions and trends that I think I've noticed that we're starting to look at various solutions, and one of them in particular, just going back to the previous slide, I'm working with a company called Locale, and they look after a lot of things that relate to the social engagement, the tenant engagement, and connecting with your staffing and stuff like that. We're also talking to somebody like Tanger, who are based in Stockholm, and they're about using your phone for virtual reality and augmented reality signposting. I've also met a company called Yonder Desk in Dublin. They have a very interesting product, and it's like a virtual workplace where you can drop into people's offices and stuff like that. So I think those are just opportunities that I wanted to mention before I move on. Then my predictions and trends, then I think regional flex space is going to be a big one. I think the fact that people are working from home, they don't necessarily want to make the big long commute. I think you might start to see flex offices in suburban locations, and that's already starting to be mentioned around this industry. Another thing that I've seen a big increase is bike share. We are replacing our bus service that does 3,500 people a day. We're replacing it with bike sharing opportunities by putting bike sharing, e-bikes, e-scooters, and just normal push bikes around the place. We're hoping to give people an alternative to the bus companies. I do not think sustainability is going anywhere. I think there has been a temporary reduction in the focus on it because everyone's dealing with the crisis that is COVID. But I think if you start to think about it from the point of view of the future, and if you think about it from the point that Bill Gates warned us 5 years ago that sustainability, climate change, all of this, he was warning us about COVID, and a lot of people, he was warning us about flu-borne epidemics and the fact that an epidemic or a pandemic could do huge harm. And he was mostly ignored by a lot of governments. And those governments went on to discover that he was actually right. And we've spent hundreds of millions and billions on correcting this terrible damage. Now, the scientists have been warning us for about 2 decades of the issues that climate change present. And I just wonder whether we're going to ignore those now. I don't believe we are. I think now is going to be a time when we all start to focus. And on that basis, I think because the real estate industry has 40% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, that puts a huge target on us as an industry. It means that governments looking to recover taxation for all of this expenditure they've had to make on COVID, I think it puts us in the target. Anyone with inefficient buildings will be taxed higher in the same way gasoline engines and diesel engines are going to be taxed higher. And don't forget what Larry Fink of BlackRock, the big investment company, he said that climate risk equals investment risk. And I think that is something to leave you with. It's a major thing. If anyone would like to contact me or reach out or anything like that, my handle on social media is Gavin J. Gallagher. Don't forget the J. And I have a website, gavinjgallagher.com. I also have a podcast, which I just plugging there, Behind the Facade. I talk about all of these things. I mostly cover investment, innovation, impact, the mental game, and the mindset behind the real estate industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gavin. And we actually won't let you go yet because I have some questions for you.
Oh, please.
And the first one goes like this. Post-COVID, do you think that there will still be the demand for large office space or perhaps smaller hub and spoke models with facilities like media studios?
I think there's going to be a combination. And I think it goes back to what I mentioned in my talk about sector dependent. I think you're going to have large companies that continue to use space the way they were traditionally. But then there's going to be smaller companies that I think will look at that kind of hub and spoke model. I think, companies, it's the activity that is more important than the actual company itself. You've got people, for example, in an accounting or administration function. Those guys need quiet areas. They could work quite happily at home or at a local kind of desk in a hub and spoke type model. But if you've got creative teams or you have professional teams that require mentoring and all of that kind of creative work. That doesn't work in a kind of hub and spoke model, in my opinion.
Thank you. Big loser right now seems to be the WeWorks of the world, for example, co-working spaces. Do you think the market will return given your comments about activity-based workplaces?
I do. I think the big problem with WeWork was not the product. I think their product market fit was actually very good. I think the issue with WeWork was the crazy valuation that they tried to give themselves. I think the reality is that co-working and flex space, I think it's actually here to stay. I think what a lot of big corporates are now looking at is the agile workplace, where they will only occupy enough of a footprint to, say, accommodate 60% of all of their staff. And what they will do then is they will outsource the rest through flexible options.
We now thank you, Gavin Gallagher. Will you be joining the virtual roundtable discussion after this?
Yeah, I think so. I've got a fireside chat that I'm doing today. And so, yeah, I'm here. I'm here to talk to you guys.
So plenty of opportunities to continue the discussion with you. Thank you. So for those interested, please join Gavin for those.